Of the 1,000 plus OSHA standards, how do you know which ones to apply to your business? Today, Liz Petersen of SHRM and I will be covering which OSHA laws shift-based organizations should know. Let's get right into it. So I want to first point to this very first slide that we've got here on the ins and outs of OSHA. So talking, kind of highlighting some of these bullet points, safety rules and regulations apply to all workers, regardless of their work. Shift workers must receive all OSHA mandated safety training. I think this is a very important topic we'll kind of dive into a little bit more later. They must be required and provided with all the necessary PPE. They must have access to safety information, inspected, maintained for safety hazards, required medical examinations. I think that's a really important one as well. And then finally, they must have access to emergency first aid treatment, supplies, and equipment. So my question for you is, how can you highlight some of the key OSHA regulations that are particularly relevant within these shift-based industries? I think that there's so many to feel like that you need to keep track of. Are there any that you can narrow down or highlight?
I would say probably the injury and illness record keeping is probably going to be a big one to make sure that they're focusing on. That usually can be something that can be overlooked or incidents aren't reported. PPE, as well as their forklift training. HAZCOM is often hazardous communication, which really includes the safety data sheets for any hazardous hazardous chemicals that individuals might be working with. That's often something that might be overlooked. And then there's also things like noise and heat exposure, respiratory protection, confined spaces. It just really depends on the type of industry and what type of positions are working. But sure. That is, and I missed lockout tagout for your machinery. If you're have any faulty issues, making sure that you're locking out and tagging out your machinery. All those things are really important. So it does cover a big gamut when you're talking about shift-based as well as manufacturing specifically.
Absolutely. I was listening to a podcast about how there's kind of a horror story of a company where they weren't actually tracking OSHA regulations. They weren't logging it in their 300 OSHA form. My question for you is, what are the implications if HR doesn't follow these regulations? Like, what happens at the end of the day?
Yeah. So when you're talking specifically about OSHA violations and their penalties, that can get pretty pricey. So a willful and repeated violation in 2024, they just upped them. I think it's like January 15th of every year, can be up to $161,323 per violation.
Oh my God.
Other penalties can be over 16,000, about 16,131 is the max per violation. And that can add up really quickly. And then if somebody just is told to make a fix and they don't make the fix, that can actually be added per day to the violation. So there's definitely a risk financially that way, but you also have to think about just things like the damage that might be happening with accidents and injuries that occur. The cost for your workers' comp injuries would be going up potentially due to more frequent or even more higher risk or higher level accidents or injuries. There could be, forklift drivers could damage product, or that could be pallets, that could be full racks of product, that could be a whole truck that could be damaged. So there's a lot of risk when safety isn't considered. And so thinking about that when you think about budgeting and those types of things, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, is really big.
Yeah. And, on our side of things, obviously it's very scheduling heavy, right? So when employees need to swap out, swap in, they have a call out, there's something going on, making sure that obviously managers are approving the swap shift, but that employee who's swapping their shift is qualified to work that role. So whether in this case, like a forklift operator, if let's say forklift operator A needs to call out, they need to swap their shift with B, that forklift operator B is actually qualified to do exactly what's needed of them. And, we have these tools on the HR compliance side, on our scheduling side of things that of course allows that. And it's a huge, huge lift off of manager side of things on the admin side. So making sure that, the safety of it is covered across the ground. So with your experience in manufacturing and varying employee schedules, what are common compliance challenges that HR teams usually face in trying to maintain these standards and trying to kind of uphold these regulations?
And you hit it really directly there, Meredith, with the concern of especially shift-based when they are
Yeah.
using a skeleton crew and somebody or a few people are out, maybe they're on leave, maybe there's some vacant positions and they're having a hard time filling that late shift. How do they get somebody to fill in for that role and have the training? And a lot of
Yeah.
times managers have to make that call. Do I just put somebody in who isn't fully trained because I need to get this done? Or is safety the priority? And that's really a tough piece for employers to make those decisions when it comes down to the operational viability of that shift. Things like machinery breaking down, maybe a finger guard got broken off of a machine, and during the day you have somebody come in and fix it. That's not a big problem, but if they're not there to fix it, what do you do? And a lot of times employees will not say anything. They'll just put that guard kind of there, even though they know it's broken, and just keep working. And that could cause a lot of risk
For
for
sure.
that individual or others around them. So, or even the person that comes in the next shift, if it's not reported that there was an issue. So a lot of that is concerning. There's also concern of for late shifts, especially the fatigue, the stress, the lack of concentration when you're working those late shifts, those long hours. Sometimes people work 10 hours, 12-hour shifts, and they can get tired. They can also feel like those late shifts might be less structured. So
Right.
they might decide to play pranks on each other or have
Mhm.
some fun. And you want to have a little bit of humor in your day, but those things can be very distracting, especially if you're doing something safety sensitive, you're working with machinery. So there's a lot more risk in those areas.
Yeah, and I like that you touched on managers kind of needing to make that call on, all right, we need somebody to obviously come fill this shift. We only have so many people that are qualified in whatever that qualification might be. Do we make that call? And understanding that implication of what happens if something goes astray. I mean, it is so important to know. And I love that you highlighted that, because the reality is, especially in today's labor market, where there's only so many people that can do so many things, and a lot of people are looking to upskilling and up training, which is great, but it could also only go so far to some extent. It's really important to note that. And this is kind of where compliance comes in, where we're starting to look to the DOL and we're starting to look to wage and hour laws and things like that that are keeping us in line. And it's hard to make those calls for sure. Are there any specific OSHA requirements that HR should pay extra attention to when managing these safety protocols for, like you said, night shifts or even irregular working hours?
Yeah, the training and preparation for the key shift workers, it's really important that they get extra training, that they feel very confident, especially with those skeleton crews. If their manager's off, and somebody comes in to help out, but they're not really the manager, do they have the appropriate training? So you have to make sure that you train more people than maybe you expect to train on particular positions. That's a big part of the requirement. Assessments of hazards, not only during the day, but at night. Things might be locked differently. There might be empty or empty areas where somebody's working by themselves. What if they're working by themselves and they get injured? Is anyone in the area? How would they know?
Yep.
These are different things that employers need to consider. They can't just consider what's happening during the day. They need to consider how the night shift's working, if there's different areas that they have access to, and then things like incident responders. Do you have enough people trained that know what to do if there is
Yeah.
an incident? Do they know where the first aid kit is? Do they know
Sure.
about bloodborne pathogens? Do they know what hazardous chemicals somebody's working with so that they can counteract that, whether it's flushing it out or whatever the case might be, until 911 can be called if there is a more dire emergency. But there's a lot that needs to be considered for those shift workers to make sure that they feel comfortable, just because you don't have the full rest of the staff there on site. They have to be more self-reliant.
Thank you so much for watching that segment from our webinar on how to prevent OSHA lawsuits. If you'd like to watch the full webinar, click this video here and be sure to subscribe for more content like this.